In this recording, I'm going to show you how to create a mobile phone holder using mostly acrylic. I'm going to use the sheet material option. I think it's actually called the sheet metal model, which is there. I start off by creating my document. So that was new document within Onshape, and then I'm going to first of all click on these three bars and check that my workspace units are millimeters. That's really important that you do that so that your work comes out correctly for the UK. And then I'm going to green tick that. Now hopefully your units will be set anyway because of when you set up your profile. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to create a sketch of the base. So I'm looking at my work planes here. This tutorial really expects you to have done a little bit of Onshape before, so you would know about work planes and sketches and extrusions. Hopefully you can follow along, so pause it as and when you need to. So I'm going to work on the top work plane. That's the one that points up and down. And I'm going to go to sketch. I'm going to choose that top work plane, and then I'm going to press N for normal so that I'm viewing straight onto it. Then I use my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a rectangle there. Now you can see that the box is highlighted at the top. If I type 80 into that, that will automatically dimension, and then 80 for my next one. That gives me a square with dimensions of 80 by 80. Quite often I'll make my own changes to dimensions, and I would do that by using the dimension tool that sits up at the top there. Okay, so that's an alternative option to get to. So once I've done that sketch on the top plane, I green tick it, and that's now sitting there ready for me to do my next activity. Now there's lots of different ways of approaching a sheet metal project or a sheet material project. I'm going to do a process where I thicken that sketch. At the moment there's no thickness to it. I haven't extruded it or anything like that. So I'm going to use the sheet metal tools to do that. If I click on here, I've got various options. I'm going to go to the sheet metal model option, which is the standard, and I'm going to go thicken, and it's saying what do you want me to thicken, and I say that sketch there. Alright. Now because I've been in this before when I was fiddling around with this tutorial, I've already put a thickness in of 3mm. That's a standard thickness for acrylic, one of the standard thicknesses for acrylic, and when I adjust that, it adjusts the bend radius. That's the amount of curve on any corners. If I bring this down to something like 0.8, which would be a standard metal thickness, what I can then do, what it would then potentially do, let's change that again. The bend radius didn't change. That's interesting. Quite often that bend radius will change, so let's leave it like that. So 3mm. Okay, and then I'm going to green tick it. You'll see how that works in a minute. So I'm checking that I've got the front view. I know where I'm looking. If I right mouse down, I can actually view different parts of this. It's really important to understand where your front is, where your top is, and where your sides are for your technical drawing, if nothing else. So I'm going to make sure, looking at my view cube, that front is pointing towards me now. That's the front of my object, and I'm then going to go to a flange. Now flange is literally a bit that sticks out from another edge. So if we were doing a sheet metal box, you could consider it to be made up of a base and then 4 flanges. Alright, so a flange is just going to literally come off that corner there. I'm going to select that, and it gives me a preview. Alright, so if I look at this, there's my 3.2mm bend radius. I'm going to make this bit, instead of it being 25mm, I'm going to make that 150mm. Okay, so now that increases the size dramatically. I'm pressing down on the middle mouse button and using the middle mouse wheel to view at that different heights. Now, at the moment that's 90 degrees. 90 degrees is pointing straight up. If I went to, let's go to 0 degrees for a minute and see if it does it. It doesn't like 0 degrees. Let's go to 1 degree. Hopefully it'll prove the point. 0 would be flat, and obviously it's a flange, so it's expecting some sort of bend. Let's go back to 90. Okay, so if we wanted to come in this direction, I want this to lean back, we can experiment with our angles, and I think for me it's going to be something like 120 degrees, so that that face is leaning back over that back panel. You could potentially go 130 and press enter. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go to 120. Nice neat number, and then I'm going to green tick that. So that process I could come back into. If I wanted to edit it, that now sits in the model tree over here, and I could right click and edit to come back in and change those measurements if I wanted to. Okay, now I'm going to rotate around, have a bit of a look at that. So look, there's the front view. I'm looking straight at it if I've got the front view there. And usually on your view cube you can click on different bits to get different views. Now I'm going to do a sketch now, and one of the things that doing the sheet metal process allows us to do is it creates a flat pattern of our object. So it's like a box that's unfolded, and you can see what's happening over here on the right. We can see the flat view. Okay, so there's my flange, there's my base, and there's the bend radius, and I can minimize that as I go. So that will update when I do changes now. That will update this particular view. I'm going to just hide the front work plane, and I'm going to hide the right work plane. So they're still there. I can turn them back on just to make my views easier. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a sketch on the front for two little holes that are going to stick out on the front. So I go sketch, I choose the front face of that object, and then I'm going to press N for normal, so I'm looking straight at it. Okay, now I'm going to do two circles, and I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click and I'm going to drag out. Okay, and then click. I'm not going to worry about the dimensions. I'm going to dimension those in a minute. But my next one, I'm going to hover over there and pull that out. I'm deliberately avoiding, there's a little, it highlights here. I did this earlier and it tries to lock on to certain points. I do want that middle and this middle to lock together. But if you find anything highlighting here, try and step away from it. Don't click. Right, so that middle and that middle should be lined up horizontally. You can see the sizes of those are very different. I'm going to use my dimension tool this time. I'm going to click on the edge and drag out, and I'm going to type 3.3. Okay, very small, and I'm going to type on this one 3.3. So those two are now the same size. Okay, now let's put a space in between them. You'll notice that I'm working on the center of these circles here. Sorry, dimension tool, click on the two middles, and let's type in 60 for a second. Okay, so these are two circles with a diameter of 3.3, and in between the two is a distance of 60. And these are going to be holes in that front face that we're going to put some rivets into later on. And what I now need to do is I need to position those two to the left and the right of this object. So let's do my dimension tool, the middle of that one, and we're going to link it to the edge, the left hand edge. And if I type in 10, it now pulls both of those circles across because they were linked. And you'll notice earlier, do you remember how we kind of plotted it so that the middle lined up with each other? That pulled them both in and they stayed horizontally aligned. Right, so we've now got a 10mm gap from the edge. I'm just going to put another dimension here just to show you what happens. If I click on the middle of that and the edge of this one and drag out and press enter, what it does is it gives me a grayed out version, and that grayed out version proves that that's a driven dimension. So any change I make to this, let's make this 5 for a second, it updates that dimension, so that shows me there that that gap is 15. And let's just come back to 10 again. Okay, that's now 10 again. So it shows me what my spacing is. Driven dimensions are important because if you imagine I tried to pull that to 20 in, that would try and change this middle dimension. So you've got there 60, 10 and 10. That makes 80. If I try pulling this across, let's make that 30. My driven dimension gets bigger there. So it's guided by whatever remains after those. It's worth knowing, if it's greyed out, it will change. So I wanted that to be 60. And the great thing about CAD is you can experiment, you can explore things. Right, now there's my two holes. They are 10mm in from each edge. They are 3.3 in diameter. My final bit of dimensioning is going to be to get them lined up with the top of that object. I'm deliberately not doing it off the bottom. I could probably do it off here, but I'm going to do it from the top to allow me to position these up or down on that face. So there's my dimension tool, click in the middle of that one. Oh, hang on, I lost my dimension tool. Click in the middle of that one. Click on the top of that, and there's my dimension. Okay, now that's coming in at 111. Let's change that to a number that makes more sense, 110, 11 centimeters. Okay, now let's move that around a little bit. So I'm right-clicking, right mouse button here. Let's change that to 50, and you'll see they go shooting up. Let's change that to 130, and you'll see they come shooting down. So you can change those because you've dimensioned it now. You can change those if you want to later on. Let's make that 120. Have a look. Okay, so those holes are now dimensioned, the space between them, in from the edges, the diameter, and the distance down from the top. Looking good. Okay, green tick. Then I want these to be holes. Currently they're not, so I'm going to go to my extrude, and I'm going to click on this and on this. Check that you don't click to highlight that, because otherwise it will extrude that face. You want to extrude that hole and that hole, and make sure it's on remove material. If we did if we did new, it would give us these two little pegs, which is kind of what we might want anyway, but we actually want to cut a hole. So remove, and then green tick. So I've now got two holes in the middle of my material. Not in the middle, in my material. If I now come back to my flat pattern, what you can see here is those two holes appear in the flat pattern. Really useful. Let's close that flat pattern again. Now, those are going to be where we clip a piece of channel or something. So I'm going to create now, in my part studio, a channel. So I'm going to go, let's turn my right work plane back on so I can see that. So is it visible? There we go, it's visible now. So I turned that on over on the left, and I'm going to go sketch on the right work plane, N normal to view onto it. Now you might think I'm going to try and draw this in position. I'm actually not. I'm going to draw a channel just as though it was made up of look at me linking that there. Right, so I've escaped that line now. So I've done this channel here, and I'm drawing it as though it's a separate bit. Sorry, I forgot, I didn't finish my sentence then, did I? So we're going to do a separate bit, and I'm going to dimension that now. And I'm going to make that 16, and I'm going to make that 16, which means that that one, because I lined it up with the other one, will automatically be 16. Let me just change that and show you. So when I drew it, I made a link between that one and that one by hovering across, but if you didn't, you could always put another dimension line there. Let's take that back to 16. And then I'm going to, I could offset. Offset's an interesting one. Should we try offsetting this? This offset tool here is going to draw me a line linked to my dimensions that I've put in. And it's saying offset by what? So this is my wall thickness. If I just move down a bit so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so that blue line is offset. That's using this tool here, and we'll give that a wall thickness of, it's annoying that that's appearing there, we'll give it a wall thickness of 1.2. okay, so the spacing there between that line which we originally drew at 16 and that line there is 1.2, and it's 1.2 there, and it's 1.2 there. Now if I try and extrude this, it's not going to work because I haven't closed that, so I would refer to that as a valid profile. So the next thing I'm going to do is to use my line tool. I'm going to click here, and then click here, click here, and click here. So that object is now a valid profile, I hope, and it'll be ready in a minute for me to extrude it. So it's filled it. Did you notice how that went grey? That means it's filled. I'm going to just press escape for a second to come out of any tools that I'm in. Let's move that so we can see what we're doing. So that is 1.2, not 12. It's 16 and it's 16. So a standard aluminium profile. And if I green tick that, you can now see I've got that sitting there. Okay, and next thing to do is to extrude that face. And I think I'm going to extrude it by, let's extrude it by 80. The same length as our panel. Okay, and then I'm going to green tick it. Now, our spacing here was 60 between those two holes. So I want to drill a hole in here at 60. Okay, so that corresponds, and what I'll do is I'm going to draw it on the back face. So I go sketch, I choose that back face, I go N for normal, so I'm looking straight at it, and I'm going to be able to do my drawings. Now it looks to me like part 2 is going to get in the way, so I'm going to make my visibility, sorry, part 1 gets in the way, so turn the visibility off and on, and suddenly it disappears and I can see what I'm doing. So part 2 is what I'm drawing on. So again, I've gone to my circle tool, I'm going to click and drag, make sure I'm hovering next to that, see how it gives me my constraint, so it's horizontal constraint, click and drag. Now again, I could dimension there, I always do this because it makes sense to me, so 3.3, and that one 3.3, 3.6, 3.3, and then dimension between those two 60. And then my final one is I'm going to want to evenly space that, so if I click from the middle of that one to the edge of that one and then click and turn that to 10. Okay, and then the final thing, if you remember, although these two are horizontally aligned with each other, they could come up or down or whatever, so I'm going to just take the middle of that one and line it up with the top of that and make that 8. Green ticket. So there's my object, and I'm going to then do a extrusion of that hole and that hole. Now remember, we're in add mode, so let's remove, and I'm going to remove just on that side. So I can pull that. You'll notice it's going all the way through. I'm just going to pull it so it only comes through that one surface, and then I'm going to green tick it. Okay, so that is my aluminium channel. Okay, now remember I've hidden this one. So that aluminium channel is going to sit on the front of that. Right, now let's make one more component. Now this is going to be kind of a blind rivet, a pop rivet. I'm slightly making up the dimensions on this, so any of you who are really expert in pop rivets, sorry, because I'm going to just make this up. So I'm going to go sketch, I'm going to go right, and I'm going to go N. So this is my third component. I'm going to use my line tool. I'm not worrying about where it is in position, I'm just doing it so I can see it. I'm going to draw up. I'm then going to draw another line next to it, up, and make like a little T shape here. Right, and I'm going to put some dimensions on that before I get too carried away. Right, click there, and that dimension is going to be Let's make that 0.5. Where's that gone? There it is. Right, so the dimension between those two is 0.5, half a mil. I'm going to just close that up. So that's going to be my wall thickness of my rivet. Okay, then here, I'm going to just take this line and join it up there, hopefully. Is it going to do it? Did it join it? It looked like it did. So I've just joined that up. Okay, it could be, sometimes what I do if I get those wrong, I would just delete that whole line and draw it in again. Okay, so again, I'm just going to double check that that is 0.5, still is, but by my twiddling around it looks like I've adjusted that, so I might just come in and get a perpendicular, just tweak that up. Did it work? There we go. It's just squared that up a little bit for me. I'd messed around with it. So perpendicular is like giving it a right angle. You might not need to do that. Half a mil wall thickness. Now, I'm going to do a line next to that, vertically up. I'm hoping I'm getting this right. And I'm going to click on that line. And I'm going to turn it to a construction line. Construction lines don't appear in your final product. All right, they're part of your construction of your object, but they don't extrude and stuff like that. So they're quite a useful guideline, really. Okay, so if we think about a 3.2 wide pot rivet, we need that to be 1.6 from that edge. Now again, I'm slightly making up my dimensions here, so bear with me if this all goes horribly wrong. 1.6. Okay. So I've got a center line. This will all become clear in a minute. And I've got my profile of my pot rivet. I'm going to just dimension some of these. Now I can see how that's forming up. We're going to make that 5. We're going to make this 1. Even that's probably a little bit big. And what I might do afterwards is put a curve on that or something. I'm going to leave that at 1. You'll see what happens in a second with this, I hope, if I've got it right. Okay, so I've got this funny little profile here. We've got a 5 mil, we've got 1 mil. Therefore that bit, if I just click on here, you'll see what happens. That gives me 4 mil. But remember, it's grayed out and it's a driven dimension. So if I change that, the driven dimension changes with it. Okay, and I can always adjust it if I go wrong. So I've got a center line and I've got 1.6, and I'm going to use that center line now to revolve that sketch. Okay, so if I come up to my tools up at the top, I'm hoping I can find my revolve tool. There it is. Okay, so this is a feature. Click on revolve and it says, what do you want me to revolve? That face there. What's my axes for revolution? That axis there. Okay, now the computer seems to be, I think Onshape's running a little bit slow for me. I don't know whether I've got network issues, but it then gives me my component. Okay, so it's done a revolution. I'm going to undo that revolve and just do it all in one hit. Okay, so zoom in and out. Revolve tool, I want that face revolved around that axis. Okay, and it's then done it. Now in reality, a profile like that is going to be bigger. I'm looking at that and thinking that looks a little bit skinny to me for a pot rivet, but it'll do for the process here. If I wanted to come in and change it, that's sitting here, and I can come in and I can edit it. And I'll tell you what I want to change is the thickness of that. In fact, I might just do it. Right, let's make that 1, and it pulled that part out, and you can see that that will then update my revolution, and I've got a bigger rivet. And then the next thing I might just do on this is to give it a fillet, which will round off that top. It's gone red because it doesn't like it. Let's make that fillet 0.5. See, I've adjusted it over here on the left. That's rounded it off. I'm losing my rivet because it's hidden behind my other parts, and again I could hide the parts if I wanted to just work on the rivet, but I don't mind seeing those. Okay, now the final thing I might just do is just put a little tiny chamfer inside here, and I'm going to make that 0.25. So that's now giving it a little kind of angle, just to soften it up a little bit. Right, so there are my 3 components. There's a bit of work I might do on this in a bit, but let's just get going on this for a second. We'll join these parts together. I'm thinking now, I've got my blind rivet needs to be able to pass through a 3mm piece of acrylic and through a 1.2mm piece of aluminium. So let's just come back at that sketch and go, will it? I wonder. So that's sketch 5. Edit. Is it going to be long enough? 4. It's not going to pass through, is it? It would be 3, and it would then be 1.2 to get through the other end. So we actually need to make that 6. And then hopefully that can update. There we go. So now that's long enough that it can pass through those 2 components. And again, you know, if you were evaluating why we use computer-aided design, it's that ability to experiment and to make changes. So 26 minutes in for me, probably almost a lesson for you. So let's come on to an assembly now. So automatically you get an assembly with your part studio, and I'm going to click on that, and now I'm going to bring in my components. So that's a bit weird, isn't it? So on the one hand, we've drawn them all in the part studio. Why didn't we just assemble them there? It's because it's easier to put things together, and you might use one part that you've made more than once in your drawing, which is exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to go insert, and then you've got various things that it's looking for here, and it's going, I can bring the whole lot in. I prefer to bring them in part by part. You could bring it all in one go, but let's bring in part 1. Right, and I'm going to just green tick that and say part 1 is in. Now remember, I was quite particular about drawing it on the front work plane earlier, and that's because if I now click on the front there and then I rotate it through, it's lined up and it's sitting flat, and if you didn't do that properly earlier, it might come through at a funny angle, and that can take a bit of working out. So I'm not going to cover that now, but basically that part is in. I've got one more job to do. This is my main bit, and I'm going to actually select that part. I'm going to right click, so right click, and I'm going to fix. The reason for that is that it would move around if I don't fix it in position. So although I can kind of scroll around, the object itself is actually, if you imagine that that was sitting on a table, it wouldn't be moving. It's fixed in position. Okay, so my view can change, but the object itself in virtual space is fixed in one spot, and that's really important, particularly for a base component, a main component. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert another part. So I go insert, current document, let's bring in part 2. That's the aluminium channel, and this time let's bring in a couple more bits. Part 3, we'll bring 1, part 3, we'll bring in 2 of those. So we've got our 2 rivets, and then a green ticket. So I've now got all of my components in one spot. Let's line up those holes with those holes, hopefully. Right, so I'm going to go to my constraints now. Remember, this is locked off, so I'm going to go to my constraints, and I'm going to go to cylindrical mate. I'm going to choose the inside of this one, click there, I'm going to come out, and I'm going to choose the inside of there, and I'm going to green tick that. Okay, now what I'm going to do next, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to choose the inside of that one and the inside of the one behind. Could do it from a variety of different views. I'm going to green tick that. and I'm then going to click solve, green tick, and solve. Right, so what do we see here? If I just zoom out again, there's my part, and I've just lined up that hole there with that hole there, I hope. Now if I try and move it around, it didn't lock off on that second one, did it? I'm going to just delete cylindrical 3 over here. I'm going to delete cylindrical 2 over here. Now that I've got it really wonky, cylindrical 1 worked. Okay. Now again, if I'm honest, I find mating a little bit confusing on this bit of software. Okay, so there's probably a much simpler way of doing this, but this will work. I'm going to do another cylindrical mate here and here whilst I've got them separate. Cylindrical mate, click on that one there and that one there, and green tick and solve. Okay, so that hopefully has solved that problem for me. Okay, and then if I drag it around, you can see it's now no longer twizzling around. I'm going to just delete that a second. So cylindrical 1 and cylindrical 2. Right, next job is going to be to take that face there and lock it off against that face there, constrain it against that. This is going to be a planar mate. Okay, so I'm going to take that face there and I'm going to lock it in against that face there. For some reason in this software it sort of jumps things around a little bit. Remember, the first thing we did is we've got these holes locked in, so it's just showing me here that it's locking those two faces together. It then jumps back into its preferred position there. Okay, so if I now try pulling that around, it can't move left and right, it can't move up and down, and it can't move backwards and forwards because it's locked off into that position there. Okay, and that's the little tray that we can use to hold our mobile phone in. Now, for the sake of this object, we need to make sure that we've got our pins in position, and a couple of different ways of doing it. I quite like using the cylindrical mate. Again, that works well for me. So I'm going to take that cylinder there, hopefully this will work, and I'm going to take that cylinder there and I'm going to green tick that. So that's now in position in that hole. Let's do the same thing with the other one. What I wasn't sure about for a minute there is whether or not it was going to flip it backwards or forwards, but that worked fine. So again, cylindrical mate, that cylinder there, zoom in and choose there, and green tick it and solve. Now they're not really fully constrained, because what these can do is move in and out. Okay, so my final job I need to do there, I'm going to just pull them both out a little bit, and I'm going to make that face there meet that face there. Okay, so that's going to be a planar mate, so it's a flat mate. Planar mate, zoom in, click on that one, zoom out, click anywhere on that one, green tick, boom. Now my next one, come over here, go to my planar mates, click that face there and make it link to that face there, and green tick it, solve, green tick. Okay, so that's now giving me an object which is pop riveted, blind riveted together. It's constrained. Now if I wanted to come back in, let's say I've kind of made it, you'll have noticed me a few times, because I'm doing this mating quite inefficiently, that often you would do a number of things at the same time, I'm deleting these extra bits when I get a red one. So you could right click and delete any of those mates if you found you wanted to adjust things again. And again, when we think about a computer aided design, the great thing about it is it allows us to create multiple parts, adapt them, test them out, try them out. Particularly if you're doing coursework, you want to show that you're making adaptations and stuff like that. Now the next thing I'm looking at, I just think this is going to be really difficult to get a pop rivet gun, a blind rivet gun, into that bit of channel to be able to pop that in. Now I could drill a hole there. If it was something like a nut or a bolt, I could drill a larger hole to allow a screwdriver access. But I think what I can do is come back into my drawing and actually imagine that I hacksaw away part of this front face, because it doesn't need to be that big, it doesn't need to be that chunky. So let's come back into that part studio here where all of those components are formed, and I'm going to do a new sketch on this face here. Choose that face, press N for normal, view straight onto it, and I'm going to do a rectangle which locks off here, and then a rectangle that locks off there. So these are all still within the same sketch. Okay, and then I'm going to use my dimension tool to give them an actual size, because it was just very random. So let's make that 20, and let's make this 20. Okay, and we'll make sure that both of them are the same distance up from the edge. Let's make that 2 and 2. Right, now this is not design, is it? This is really bad design, but it kind of it demonstrates how you use dimensions to constrain an object. And I'm going to extrude and make some horrible 90-degree cut in here, but the reality would be that you actually need to think about making it more attractive than this. Now if you look at that, it's gone all the way through. I can just literally pull it back until it's only going through those front bits. I can green tick it, and that's now removed that material, and that would have to be done with a milling machine. You could potentially do some careful hacksawing and some filing to allow access for the pop rivet gun to get to the front of that. I think for the sake of a little bit of aesthetics, I'm going to just put a fillet on that top corner because it looks so horrible, and make that 3, because I could probably hand file that on quite easily. And whilst I'm still within the fillet tool, I'm going to come and choose this corner here. Okay, so that's looking a little bit better, isn't it? So if I now green tick that, and we OK that. I was very tempted to come and fill it in here, but actually that would, if I was using a milling machine to cut that out, I'd want a nice straight edge there. I also think I would probably do some filleting on these corners here, but let's just call it a day on that for a minute. If I now go back into my assembly, you can see what it's done is it's revealed those 2 pop rivets, and it's given me a an update. And that's the thing with parametric designs, that it takes the various components, and any changes you make, it will apply them. So if I went into my rivets, for example, I could increase the length of them in that part of the drawing, and they would then appear longer in the assembly, or if I use them again. So that's really key. Right, so if I now, let's just do one more thing just to demonstrate a point. I'm going to go back into the part studio. I'm going to put a curve onto that component there. So if I just use, I'll do a curve rather than going back in fact no, I will go into this sketch here. If I come into that sketch and go edit, that was a sketch where my 2 holes are. Go N for normal, so I'm viewing straight at it. If I now pull in that corner using the fillet tool, hopefully, will it? No, it won't. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a new sketch on that face. Sketch on that face. Press N for normal, and now I'm going to do a let's cut a corner off this. Random shape, using it as a cookie cutter. So I am viewing normal, so let's just look at my angle of that to that. Let's make that 120. Degree corner off there. Let's get the distance of see, this is the trouble with me doing a random shape. I'd have been better off doing a proper shape, wouldn't I? but I'm going to stick with my random creativity for a second here. You can see that line stays at 120. I can pull these nodes around, get it where I want it. Okay, if I green tick that, and if I then extrude that and remove material, okay, that's just chopped the corner off. Let's, within this object, we just use the filleting process to round off that corner and that corner, and green tick it. And I could do all sorts of things. I could punch all sorts of holes into it and cut slots into it. So I've now put that angle in the top just so you can see what I'm talking about. This is not good design. And I've put 2 fillets there. If I now go into my flat pattern, you can see that it's actually done that to that shape. So I can do all sorts of creative things on the model on the left, and it will adapt my flat pattern on the right. Okay, so I think that's pretty much where I want to go with this. One final thing, actually, do you know what? I will do one more thing. So we've got our assembly. That's got that horrible cutout. I'll tell you what I've lost here is the view. Got translucent. If I was working in a standard part, not in sheet metal, I would have my colours and my transparency over here. I can't see it on here. No, forget that. That might be something to do with the version I'm using. Anyway, right, last thing. Plus sign. Create a drawing. I'm going to make sure I'm choosing a millimeter. Oh, I'm going to choose a portrait drawing. Am I? No, I'm going to choose that drawing. I'm going to OK it. You want to make sure when you do your drawing that you bring in a millimeter version. Okay, and then it's going to say, what do you want me to bring in? I'm going to go to my assemblies first of all. I don't want the separate parts. Assembly 1. And if I go click, that will bring through my front view, then hover above it. I'm going to just press escape a second. The software seems to be running quite slowly today. Normally I'd be able to just preview there, but what I'm going to have to do is add a projected view. From that, there's my top view, plan elevation, or plan view rather, and then again, I can just escape out of that. Right. Yeah, I don't know whether I've got network issues or Onshape's got issues. I seem to be running a little bit slow on this. So there's my side elevation. So when we come to doing technical drawings, it's one of the things I really love about this. It gets the technical drawings done for you. So front view, side view, plan view. Sitting there. I'm going to just press escape for a second so we don't plant any more views. I could go click, click, and you'll notice there that it's a scale of 1 to 3. Let's change that to a scale of 1 to 2. So that's half size, and everything suddenly gets a little bit bigger. And I could come into my sheet properties and change that, but it does give me that information there. Now what I really wanted to show you that's quite important is that we can do, I'm going to just do one more projected view of that to give us a 3D one. That's a 3D view I can put there. So these 3 are linked. If I move those, it will move. They're aligned. This one, you've got freer movement around because it wouldn't be normally on an orthographic drawing. Final thing I'm going to bring in is insert view. Instead of my assembly, I'm hoping if I click on that twice, I should be able to bring in my sheet metal flat pattern. There we go. Flat pattern. Click on that. That is my flat pattern. Okay, I'm going to just press escape a second. I'm I'm going to just move all of these across because I'm hoping I might be able to fit that on my drawing. Put that there. Okay, and then final thing, click on that. I'm hoping, can I fit 1 to 1? I'm changing the scale of that view. No, I can't. So what I can see there, let's change that to 1 to 2. So that view now shows me what my flat pattern looks like. So if I was wanting to laser cut that, I could actually create a laser cut pattern from it. Now, for those of you that are a little bit more kind of keen to see how I might work with a laser on that, if I wanted to now do another drawing, let's do another drawing a second. Just extend this one more little bit. I'm going to do a portrait drawing. Okay. Now I'm going to bring in my sheet pattern. I can actually delete that table and just put that part in there. Okay, so that's now the flat version of my sheet material thing, and that's important because I should be able to come down here and right click and go to export and export a DXF. And a DXF is what can be read by laser cutters and CNC machines. Okay, so DXF is really important. Okay, I'm not going to export it. The other thing that's worth looking at on your assembly is I could right click it and export here and export for 3D printing or for viewing in a PowerPoint at 3MF. That's a Microsoft format that allows you to put it into 3D Paint and stuff like that. So that's worth doing. So DXF would be taken off for drawing like that. A 3D model could be taken off for drawing like that, either an STL or a 3MF for 3D printing. Anyway, I think I'm going to call it a day there. That's 48 minutes, that's quite long. You might do that over the course of a couple of lessons, and obviously what I was deliberately doing there was showing you how to do sketches and stuff like that that update that rectangular background. I'm going to just undo that, or I could undo that drawing that I created at the end there to get rid of that corner. Don't like that. So that improves my product. You might put a curve on it, or you might put some other design features on it. My computer is seriously lagging, so I'm going to call it a day. Good luck.